The year is 1955. A single 16mm camera rolled along the banks of the Seine. It carried more than film stock, it carried the hopes of a continent. From that moment, Senegalese voices would forever change the language of cinema. Welcome to the African Cinema Podcast. I'm your host Tendai, and today we journey through the history of Senegalese cinema, a story of struggle, triumph, silence, and rebirth. From colonial shadows to the golden years and the digital renaissance, this is how Senegal learned to speak through film. Born in Porto Novo, Dahomey, and educated in Paris, France, Paulin Vieyra's introduction to Senegal started when he moved to the country at the tender age of 10 years. His first foray into telling Senegalese stories was in 1955, when he shot his first francophone film in Paris titled Afrique-sur-Seine. It is with this film that the first sparks of cinema came to life in Senegal. But to understand the importance of this film, we have to travel back to Senegal as a French colony, specifically 1934. When the then French government passed the Laval Decree that forbade Africans from making or screening films without government approval. The aim of this decree was simple: to stop the newly established art form from being used as a tool to spread subversive or anti-colonial messages among France's colonies of the time. It was under this regime that Vieyra decided to produce Afrique-sur-Seine, a shoestring budget production fueled by a fierce conviction to tell African stories. This film is and was foundationally a rebellion against imposed silence. Such acts of rebellion and truth to power statements would define the course and golden era of Senegalese cinema. Vieyra continued to produce short films in the late 50s and early 60s as Senegal got its independence. In the late 50s, he made short films such as Afrique à Moscou in 1957 and Les Présidents seront et Modiba Keïta and Presence Africaine à Rome in 1959, among others. By this time, Vieyra shifted his focus and worked as the director of Actualities Senegalese, which was a newsreel service that reported and documented the happenings of the new nation daring to define itself. Now jump forward to 1963. Writer turned director Ousmane Sembène entered the scene with his debut short film, Borom Sarret. This film followed a poverty-stricken Wagner who goes through his day pondering on his life in the newly independent Senegal. Often regarded as the first narrative film made by a black African filmmaker with full creative control, Borom Sarret set the tone for how Sembène would explore his cinematic journey. He went on to use cinema as a tool to address the realities of post-colonial African societies. And by 1964, Sembène made another short film titled Niaye. As an adaptation of his own novella titled White Genius, the film centers around a rural Senegalese village where the village chief has impregnated his 13-year-old daughter. This storyline is layered on by the community's lack of interest in taking care of the girl and rather focusing on how this incestuous act should not be exposed to the French colonial authorities. And in 1966, Sembène delivered the first full feature fiction by a black African director from sub-Saharan Africa titled Black Girl. Its unflinching portrayal of post-colonial alienation won France's Prix Jean Vigo and announced African cinema on the world stage. Not to be outdone by himself, Sembène continued to produce and delivered Mandabi in 1968, a film made entirely in Wolof, which continued to reflect on Sembène's commitment to creating cinema that was accessible to the majority of Senegalese people who did not speak French. As the 70s rolled in, the industry began to experience its golden years. In 1971, Sembène gave the world Emitai, a film made in Diola and French. At this point, Vieyra and Sembène did not exist in a vacuum. Directors like Djibril Diop Mambéty were also paving the way for Senegalese cinema. Born in Kolobane, a suburb in Dakar, Senegal, and the son of a Muslim cleric, Mambéty began his artistic career in theatre, training as an actor at the Daniel Sorano National Theatre in Dakar. However, he was expelled from the theatre for disciplinary reasons and had no formal training in filmmaking, which contributed to his unique, experimental cinematic style. Prior to making his first feature film, titled Touki Bouki, Mambéty had first stepped into the spotlight through his short film, Contras City, which was made in 1969, and Badou Boy, made in 1970. However, Touki Bouki, released in 1973, was different. It followed two young lovers dreaming of escaping Dakar for France, using frantic editing, symbolic imagery, and a non-linear narrative to depict post-colonial dislocation and youthful disillusionment. Touki Bouki won Mambéty the International Critics Prize at Cannes and the Special Jury Prize at the Moscow Film Festival. After Touki Bouki, Mambéty would take a long hiatus to return in our second episode. By 1975, Safi Faye came into the scene. Born into an aristocratic Serere family in Dakar and raised in the village of Fadjal, she initially trained as a teacher before transitioning to filmmaking and ethnology. Faye's interest in cinema was sparked in 1966 when she met French ethnologist and filmmaker Jean Roch. Although she later expressed critical views of Roch's work, her collaboration with him, where she acted in his 1971 film Petit à Petit, helped her learn filmmaking techniques and cinema verite styles. Prior to her first feature film titled Kaddu Beykat, which was made in 1975, Safi Faye made a debut short film, La Passante, in 1972, followed by Revanche in 1973. Kaddu Beykat took a critical look into the neo-colonial agricultural policies and rural hardships that Senegalese farmers were facing. Despite its international acclaim, including the Fipresci Prize in 1976, it was banned in Senegal due to its political content. In the same year, Sembène came back with Chala, the story of El Hadji, a politician who is rendered impotent on the day of his marriage to his third wife. This film took a satirical look into the failure of many governments to overcome greed and corruption after independence. After Chala, Sembène went on to produce Chedo in 1977. Chedo was set in a Senegalese village during the 17th or 18th century, a period directly before French colonial rule, but amidst the growing influence of Islam, Christianity, and the transatlantic slave trade. The story centers on Tsedo, meaning the outsiders or non-Muslims, who resist the forced conversion to Islam and the encroachment of foreign religions and colonial powers. This film is often considered as one of Sembène's finest works. By 1979, Safi Faye went on to release Fadjal, which centered on the village of Fadjal, Safi Faye's ancestral home, where villagers recount their history through oral storytelling passed down by ancestors and griots. There's a lot more to explore about Safi Faye, and we did explore this in our second episode with Dr. Estrella, which is linked in the description below. The 70s showed the potential and beauty of Senegalese cinema, with most projects receiving funding from both the French and Senegalese governments as well. Majority of the stories told were the directors' take on the simplicity of life and the everyday experiences and interactions of the people around them. However, as the 80s rolled in, the tide turned, but still a few lights were still on. From the first sparks of Afrique-sur-Seine to the defiant voices of Sembène, Mambéty, and Faye, Senegal's filmmakers have always turned their lenses toward truth. They transformed celluloid into protest, into poetry, into a mirror for society. Even as the decade of the 1980s dimmed the lights on Dakar cinemas, their legacies endured, echoing in festival auditoriums, distant screens, and the hearts of the next generation. But this story is far from over. In episode 2, we dive into the 80s and beyond, when austerity tested the industry, yet visionaries like Sembène and Faye refused to be silenced, and where today's filmmakers are reshaping Senegalese cinema through digital innovation. Join us in the next one, but for now, ciao.